David, welcome back to Melbourne. The 9/11 conspiracy continues to rage throughout the Western world.
Right.
What are your thoughts on it?
Well, to understand things like 9/11 and other events, terrorist events, they need to be put into context. Because if you look at them in and of themselves, they're interesting enough and outrageous enough when you look at the background. But you put them in context with other things, and suddenly they take on a much more expanded state and a perception of why they happened. So if you look at what has happened since 9/11 in terms of the war on terror and regime change and all that, it would not have been justified without 9/11. That was the trigger that started it. And I'm always kind of taken aback, I shouldn't be, at the journalistic schizophrenia that I see all the time, whereby they now accept, because they can't do anything else, that Blair and Bush and the network around them lied blatantly to justify the invasion of Iraq and the slaughter of the innocent. And yet at the same time, journalists and media who will now accept that are kind of reeling back that anyone's challenging the official story of 9/11, when the same people, not the same agencies, the same people that told us the official story of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq told us the official story of 9/11. And so for a start, that should send alarm bells and red flags everywhere, because they're going to lie massively over that and tell every strand of truth about that. I mean, hello? So then you put into context of events, and in September 2000, there was an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century. This was run by what are still called neocons or neoconservatives, and they were the power behind the Boyd Bush administration. In this organization was Rumsfeld, who a few months after this document was published in September 2000 became Defense Secretary.
There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between Baghdad and some of these terrorist organizations.
There are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not.
Several unknowns, and I'm just wondering if this is an unknown.
I'm not going to say which it is.
Paul Wolfowitz, who became his deputy, Dov Zakheim, who would months later take over the entire budget of the Pentagon, Dick Cheney, who was in effect de facto president when Boyd Bush was in power, and others that were in the Bush administration, either officially or behind it. So what did this document say? Because it becomes incredibly relevant to 9/11. It said that they wanted America to, this is the wording, to fight and decisively win multiple theater wars and regime change as a result of them. And among the countries they wanted to attack was Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, etc. And they wanted regime change in China. Okay, so they then come to power in the Bush administration. And in that document, it said that this, what it called process of transformation, this regime change through multiple theater wars, would be, quote, necessarily slow in unfolding, quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. So these people came to power with Bush in January 2001. 9 months later, 12 months to the month when the document was published, we had what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And as a result of that, these countries on that list have been picked off one after the other. Then you look at the interview by General Wesley Clark, a former Supreme Commander of NATO, who was interviewed in 2007 on an alternative television program in America called Democracy Now! You can see it on the internet. And he said that a few days after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon. He met Rumsfeld, he met Wolfowitz, and then he met a general friend of his on the Joint Chiefs of Staff that supposedly run the Pentagon, but it's so compartmentalized, they are several steps down in truth.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you gotta come in. You gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So, having got their problem, which was 9/11, they could then offer their solution, which was invading all these countries. And so we can now, from this perspective, see the lies about weapons of mass destruction in a completely new light. They have this list, and they wanted to tick it off in their regime change scenario. And so they didn't have a real excuse to go into Iraq, so they had to make one up. And so they lied about weapons of mass destruction. This is how the whole thing works. And then they go into Libya, ticking off the list, and Syria, except, hold on a minute, it was Bush and Blair that went into Iraq. That was a Republican president and a Labour prime minister in Britain, okay? But the next 2 countries on the list were ticked off by Obama, Democrat, and Cameron, Conservative. In other words, the party changes, the personnel changes, but the agenda does not change, because in the end there's a hidden hand that controls both parties.